Welcome back to the Independent Republican Mike Graham right here on TalkTV. We are, of course, ladies and gentlemen, in the midst of yet another junior doctor strike. The apple doesn't fall very far from the old unionised tree, does it? Because we're still dealing with people in the NHS who don't want to work in it because they don't think they're paid enough money. I think an awful lot of people listening and watching this show would argue that that's actually not a very disingenuous point to make, because in the end, if you're a junior doctor, you could be a new doctor or you could be an old doctor. The word junior is slightly misleading. Many people who work in the NHS are paid much less well than junior doctors, and many of them have already accepted a pay deal and gone back to work, particularly the nurses. An awful lot of doctors are not out on strike, but of course the consultants, who make an awful lot more than the junior doctors, have also asked for some ludicrous amount of money, 30+%, maybe 35%. In Scotland they've accepted 12%. In this country they say no, we're not going to accept that because the governments are different. Let's talk to Professor Carol Sikora, Medical Director at Rutherford Cancer Centres, because we've got waiting lists hitting new high, 7.6 million. We've got more and more patients waiting longer and longer for cancer treatment. 4 in 10 now facing longer waits than ever. And now yet another junior doctor strike, and they're costing more and more money every single time they walk out. Professor Carol, a very good morning to you.
Morning.
It's a depressing picture, isn't it, that is probably all too easy to predict would come to us.
It's so depressing, and I've never seen it so bad. You know, Mike, I've been a consultant for an awful long time now, just over 40 years, and I've never seen the NHS in such a mess. And you know, there are good people in it. That's the annoying thing. There's good, not just doctors, there are good administrators, there are good managers. I mean, I obviously look at cancer mainly, and I look at the cancer figures, and there's one trust in Huddersfield, for goodness sake, where their cancer figures are impeccable. How can this be? What's Huddersfield doing so well? We've got to find out. Why isn't everybody, the whole of NHS England management, shooting up to Huddersfield? Let's look at I bet what it is. It's some young person straight out of college that is making it their business to sort it out. I'd like to think it was a young person. Maybe it's an old person like me that's just a boring old manager that knows what he's doing. Who knows? But their data is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, you know, sadly, people who know what they're doing are in short supply these days, Professor Carroll, and certainly in the NHS. What I always say is that it's very clear to me that the people running the NHS are the problem, not the people who actually work at the front line. You know, the doctors, the nurses, the clinicians, probably the paramedics and the anaesthetists and all of those people who come into work to do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, most of them who, by the way, did not go out on strike, even though some of their colleagues did. They're all doing the best they can do, and I take my hat off to them. But the vast majority of people, and it's more than 50% in the NHS, who do not do clinical jobs, are the problem.
You're right. And they don't have enthusiasm. They depress enthusiasm in others. You know, people go into it really full of enthusiasm at all levels, even healthcare assistants, when they go into it, they're enthusiastic. And it's tempered.
Well, you go in because you want to help people, presumably, don't you?
Exactly. And they see all this waste of management, waste of time, you know, all this nonsense about what you call women. I mean, why are people wasting time talking about people of childbirth potential instead of calling them women?
Yeah, I know. It beggars belief, doesn't it? And, of course, the worst news of all for people, and I talk to people every day about this, whether they send me tweets or messages or they call up, you know, I heard yesterday from Isabel Oakeshott that she has a friend who got a private referral for an operation that they needed to have on their abdomen in some way. The private referral was not accepted by the NHS on the grounds that it was private. And so the friend had to then go back to the GP in the NHS and get another referral, thereby delaying things even more. And if you've got a problem, I think in this case it was a lump of some kind, then, you know, why can't the two just work together?
I know. It's crazy. The other thing I heard just this week, in fact, a poor lady who has cancer was told she needs chemotherapy. She can't start it until she sees the consultant, and she'd have to wait 2 months to see the consultant in the NHS. But if she goes privately, she can see him next week and then come back to the NHS to have chemotherapy. Right. This is just nonsense. This is a system that's completely failing its customers, and we're paying for it.
Yeah.
People think it's free, and they treat it as though it's free. But it's 185 billion pounds.
Well, I keep saying to people, you know, you talk about, you know, having free delivery of the NHS and services and medical care free at the point of use, but it isn't, because about a quarter of all your income tax, yours and mine, goes to the NHS. So I'm actually paying a reasonable amount of money every single year for the NHS, and more often than not, when I go to use it, I find that I can't. You know, I went to use a dentist a few years back, and they basically said to me, you should go private. We don't think we can do what you want us to do. And I'm like, great. So I've paid into the NHS all my life, and when I now want you to do something for me, you can't do it.
I think the problem is we can grumble a lot, and Richard Tice was doing that earlier on. It's being constructive. What can we do to make it better? How can we do it? It's not money it needs. I think we agree.
Definitely not.
The doctors, they'll settle in the end. I mean, it is a left-wing anti-Tory rebellion, if you like. Most doctors are not interested in politics and don't want to go on strike, and they've carried on. But there's a few vocal in the minority that want to go out there and cause trouble. But it will settle in the end, not for 35%. That is, as Richard Tice said, ludicrous amount. But we've got to come to some constructive plan to make it work. And, you know, if money's not the answer, reorganization has to be it, involving the private sector, having competition, just like when you buy glasses from an optician's. The NHS has stopped dealing with glasses. It funds people my age. You can go and get free glasses if you want, but you don't go to the NHS. You go to an optician shop. You can get an appointment this afternoon. I've seen them outside the shops. Appointment 2:45, eye testing. You try and get an appointment at a GP this afternoon, you'll be struggling. And I think we've got to get a much more competitive consumerist focus for the health service rather than what we have, which you're not called a customer, you're called a service user. And that's the big difference.
That really is the problem, isn't it? I mean, and let's talk about the area that you know about, which is cancer care. 4 in 10 cancer patients now having to wait longer than a 2-month target to start treatment. Now, surely that is the real crux of the matter, isn't it? Because it's when you start the treatment that affects everything else.
And we're the only country in Europe, Mike, that has 2 months as a target. Everyone laughs at us in Europe. We go to a conference in Milan, as I did at the beginning of the year, and they said, this 2-month target, what are you doing? Why can't you treat everyone within a week? That's what they aim to do in Milan. And they're right, because in the 2 months, the cancer grows. It spreads from the organ it arose, breast, lung, colon, and so on, into surrounding lymph nodes, into other tissues, and the outcome is much poorer. And there's nothing you can do about it. We have good treatments, even if it's spread, but it's not as good as getting it right early. And so 2 months is too generous. And if you're not meeting that 2-month target, you know that there's a horrible event going to come for a lot of people in 2 or 3 years' time.
And is it possible, do you think, Carol, to kind of split the NHS up in some way so that if you wanted to address a problem in the cancer sector, you could just do that? And you could then sort of try and work your way through the different areas of the healthcare system.
I think you could. I mean, the program that really was fantastic was the vaccine program for COVID. That was just stole the show. It's on my app. I've got the number of the vaccines I had, all the rest of the batch numbers. It's nothing like that. You can't make an appointment with your GP. You can't change your appointment to the hospital. You can't book a CT scan. You can do nothing in the NHS. But for that, you could do everything. Volunteers, car park attendants, free car parking, all the rest of it. All the things that would make the health service great. Can't you do the same for cancer? Can't you do the same for heart disease? The ability to have the logistics organization, we just don't do it. And it's not money again. It's just organization. Instead of looking at the sidelines at things that are unimportant to people, let's look at what is important to people and get it enacted.
Yes, I think so. Very well said. Professor Carol Sikora, thank you very much indeed. Have a great weekend. Medical Director of the Rutherford Cancer Centres.